Hello there. If you've been watching my videos for some time now, you've probably noticed that whenever I talk about strength training, and I do it quite often, I primarily mention heavy barbell movements like the squat, press, and the deadlift. I barely talk about machines at all. Even in this video, you may have noticed that I don't mention machines among things you should pay attention to when choosing a gym. So are machines completely useless in strength training, or do they have their place? Today I'm going to discuss all the important things regarding training with machines. I'm going to spoil it a little bit though, because I will kind of start with a conclusion. In effective strength training, free weight exercises, especially with a barbell, are pretty much always going to be, with few exceptions, which we're also going to discuss, more useful than exercises on machines. As you may remember me explaining in this video, the fundamental principles of strength training should always be focus on basic barbell lifts and focus on progress in terms of weight on the bar. Barbell exercises engage more muscle mass over longer effective range of motion, therefore allowing you to lift more weight and thus get stronger. So taking this as a reference point, let's talk about problems with machines. Firstly, exercise machines are generally designed to isolate a given muscle group in order to fully contract and recruit it. And this may seem as a good concept on paper, but the idea that you have to isolate a muscle to stimulate its growth and strength gains is absolutely false. Thinking in terms of muscle groups is one of the bigger problems of the fitness world. It is inefficient to focus on movements involving single muscle groups because it is not the way our body normally operates, and it is not the way it gets stronger, at least not efficiently. What's natural for a musculoskeletal system are movements that engage the whole body and many muscle groups. That is why we focus on compound exercises like the squat, the press, the deadlift, which are a reflection of those natural movement patterns, and we progressively load them. That way we strengthen the whole body and every muscle. When you're standing on your feet, moving a heavy barbell and your body through space, you can fall down. The fact that you don't fall down means that you're actively controlling your balance. If you gradually increase the weight that you lift, that means your ability to maintain balance also improves, and muscles responsible for that get stronger. This effect will never be replicated by an exercise in which you sit on a machine and move the weight through a fixed path. Think about it this way. If you take your deadlift from 225 for a set of 5 to 405 for a set of 5, your entire back, hips, legs, arms, forearms have grown because they have to. There is no other way around it. They have to grow for you to be able to make that increase in strength. If you take your press from 100 for a set of 5 to 185 for a set of 5, your entire shoulders, chest, back, arms have grown because they have to. By focusing on strengthening the basic barbell movements, you don't need to worry about individual muscles because you're making all of them bigger and stronger. Even if you don't feel it, your calves, for example, work very hard during a squat. And if you're unsure of that, all you have to do to realize that is to rupture an Achilles tendon and then try squatting. You want to develop your quads? Do this instead of this. You want bigger and stronger triceps? Do this instead of this. But what if you actually want to focus on and develop a specific body part and not necessarily the rest of the body? Let's take these calves for example, and let's say they're underdeveloped compared to the rest of your musculature. You could think that in this case, it makes sense to add an isolation exercise for your calves. And I guess it makes some sense. I'm not saying your calves won't grow at all if you do that, but just think about it honestly. What do you think will make your calves grow more? Getting your calf raises from 65 to 85 pounds, or getting your squat up from 220 to 405? And that brings us to another point. If you want to get bigger and stronger, you have to lift progressively heavier weights. And in order to lift progressively heavier weights, you have to train in a way that allows you to do that. If you do an exercise on a machine like this, or this, or this, which engages one, maybe two muscle groups, where the machine allows you to usually make 5 or 10-pound jumps, how long are you able to make progress on such exercise? Few weeks. And then what? With exercises like the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, because they engage the whole body, because you use much heavier weights, and because a bar allows you to make jumps even as small as 1 pound, you can continue to make progress for many, many years. Granted, it'll be slower as you keep becoming more advanced, but it will keep going, and that means you continuously keep getting stronger. So in most cases, machine exercises are simply a waste of time. But some of them, because of the fact that they isolate specific muscle groups, which, as we already discussed, is a very unnatural situation for our body, are in fact potentially dangerous and predispose you to injuries. One of the prime examples of this are leg extensions, an exercise in which you perform a single movement, knee extension, using a single muscle group, the quadriceps. Where is the issue? Looking back at the squat, while squatting, you also extend your knees, but at the same time you extend your hips. Your torso and ankle joints are involved. As a result, all of your knee and leg muscles are actively engaged, and forces acting on the knee joint naturally balance out. Additionally, the fact that you stand firmly on your feet provides a form of grounding for the force you produce while lifting the weight. In this exercise, you extend your knees against the resistance, and that's all. There are no additional muscles engaged, there is no foot support, and as a result, all of the force you generate is focused on the anterior, the front, part of the knee joint, especially the ligaments, especially the anterior cruciate ligament, the ACL. This is a very unnatural situation for your knees, which will easily result in an overload and predispose you to injuries. The worst part of it all is that the injury most often occurs during some heavier, more compound movement, like the squat, for example. So here's a scenario. You have a person that is training legs on machines, overusing and messing up his knees, then he's going squatting, most probably incorrectly because how many people squat correctly, gets injured, and then blames the squat for being a dangerous exercise. These kinds of scenarios are in fact very common, and they are mostly responsible for the absolutely unjustified reputation of heavy barbell lifts as dangerous exercises. Obviously, there are more examples of exercises which unnaturally isolate the muscle group which isn't designed to ever work in isolation and that way cause problems. One more of them, related to the so-called rotator cuff, I covered in this video. But not all of the machine exercises are like this. Some machines can actually be useful in specific situations. Useful machines are the ones that are somewhat similar to the basic exercises and engage at least few muscle groups in a natural way. Best examples are cable pull down, similar to the chin-up, and leg press, similar to the squat. These exercises come in handy when you're dealing with people who for some reason cannot perform the basic compound exercises, because of a serious injury or because they're simply not strong enough. Many novices cannot do a chin-up, and a good proportion of the elderly population may be too weak to even squat their own body weight, let alone additional resistance. This is when machines become of use, but, and this is very important to note, you use them for only as long as necessary. Once you reach a point where they can actually squat, they need to squat. So don't use this argument as an excuse for training with machines instead of barbells. Leg press will never mimic the effects of the squat, so as long as you can squat, there is no reason for you to do the leg press. Here I want to talk a little bit about a machine that, at a first glance, may seem to fit into this model very well. But in reality, it is one of the worst, most injury-generating machines there is. I'm talking about no other than the infamous Smith machine. A barbell mounted on two uprights that fix its movement in a straight up and down line. And initially it may appear as a safe alternative for a barbell, but it's not the case. The first problem with the Smith machine is the fixed bar path. Now it is true that in the basic barbell exercises we strive to achieve a straight line bar path, but a perfectly straight line isn't always possible because the natural movement pattern under the bar doesn't always allow it. This is also the result of you needing to maintain your balance while lifting, so to keep the center of mass over the base of support, which is the middle of your feet. When the bar path is artificially fixed, natural proper movement pattern becomes disrupted, and some of the mechanisms responsible for balancing the forces around the joint, for example, which we discussed earlier while talking about the squat, cannot take place. Another problem with the Smith machine is lack of balance component. As we also explained, while lifting a barbell, you can fall down. This forces certain activity from muscles to keep you in balance, which in turn, in a way, reinforces proper technique, because it is when you're in balance, the movement pattern is generally being executed correctly, where forces around the joints naturally balance out, and there's natural muscle synergy. On the Smith machine, you cannot fall down, and that opens up possibilities for you to perform exercises in various unnatural, dangerous positions, which you could never get into with free weights. A common example which I often encounter in gyms is something like this. Squats done this way as to supposedly focus on the recruitment of the quadriceps. But all this is going to accomplish is overload your knee joints and in the long run probably cause a knee injury, similarly to the knee extension machine. And it's also worth mentioning that the lack of balance component simply limits the activity of many muscle groups which normally keep you in balance. But there is an exception to what I said, and it applies to the Smith machine as well as machine exercises in general. There is a group of people for whom training with machines may be a better option than free weight training, and that is people with severe balance impairment. It is usually a result of a neurological deficit, and granted it isn't a large portion of the population, but people like this are out there. I've had a few patients with cerebellar syndrome, for example, whom I straight up recommended to train with the Smith machine, leg press, and other machines. When these people try to lift with a barbell, balance is pretty much always their limiting factor as opposed to force production, so that kind of strength training becomes very ineffective. But with machines that take the balance component out, they have better opportunity to focus specifically on the force production component, and that way make realistic progress in terms of improving the function of their musculoskeletal system. People with balance impairment are the only group I can think of right now for which training with machines may be a better choice than with a barbell. If you think I omitted something and that there are other groups as well, let me know in the comments. But just to circle back to the Smith machine for a moment, because I said plenty of negative things about it. Aside from the exception I just described, I have to honestly admit that it's not completely useless. It does have one useful function, and I'm gonna demonstrate it now.